Welcome to Back on the Broomstick,
a modern witch's spoken word grimoire.
where two witchy friends from way back are reconnecting to their pagan roots after a long period of mundanity.
We're rewalking the path of the wise and trying out all the latest spells, rituals, and magical theory in today's witchcraft and pagan practices.
So grab your wand and your incense,
your cauldron and your crystals,
and join us
as we get
Back on the Broomstick.
Hi, and welcome to Back on the Broomstick. I'm Layla, and on this episode, we have as a special guest, Natalie Labriola. Natalie is an artist, astrologer, and tarot reader in Los Angeles, California. Her book, Tarot, Timeless Secrets of the Ancient Mirror, came out in the USA this past March, and it is a small but mighty introduction to the fool's journey of the major arcana.
And I'm Chelle, and wow, this is, you even had a line in the book. This is a dense, informative pocketbook, and you aren't kidding. So welcome, Natalie, and please tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get into tarot and astrology?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here with you guys. I found my way to tarot and astrology because I found myself in a season of life where I was searching for a different way of living. And the tarot I kind of stumbled upon the tarot accidentally. I was at like a museum gift shop. I was at the Cloisters Museum in New York, a museum of medieval art. And they had this tarot deck on display, this medieval tarot deck, and I was just very compelled by the imagery. And so I purchased a deck in the gift shop, and I just sort of thought, this will be kind of like a fun souvenir of my trip, or I didn't really have a lot of expectation around what it could do or what the tarot really was. So it was just, that was like my first encounter with the tarot, and that was when I was in my late 20s, the beginning of my Saturn return.
I have a question all ready for that.
Okay, go ahead.
I had a little sneak peek into that because I have read some of the things you've written online. You do have a website. I think, was it a Substack essay possibly? But you
Yeah.
mentioned that you had found tarot during your Saturn, your return, your 29 return. And for our listeners that don't know what that is, that happens roughly when you're about 28 or 29, when Saturn returns to the same position that it was in when you were born.
Exactly.
And what that does is it ushers in a period of change and self-reflection, all the things that you've
Painful.
learned. Yeah. All the lessons that you've had in your life up till then kind of come due, and a lot of things happen. So I was very intrigued by the fact that you found tarot at your 29 return. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just found that part kind of fascinating.
Yeah, no, I mean, in retrospect, of course, it makes sense, but at the time, it didn't feel, it was a hard season. And it's funny to talk about it now because, like I said, in retrospect, it sort of makes sense or it feels linear, it feels coherent. But at the time, it felt like just a period of, I think, several years where I was just searching for answers in regards to my health. I was that kind of period where I had to become more focused on my physical health. That was also during my Saturn return. And I found out I have a primary immune deficiency, which basically just meant that I was getting sick all the time and that I, couldn't find a doctor to help me figure out what was going on for many years. And so I felt like I was just in this limbo space for several years where I kind of had to rethink the work I was doing, which was, out going to a job, 5 days a week out in the world, and couldn't really do that in a way that felt sustainable to me at that period. And I kind of got burnt out on what I had been doing for the past decade, which was focusing on my art and trying to be like an artist in sort of like the art world in quotes. And so just a lot of things kind of came to a halt, and I didn't really know what I was doing or what it felt like I had to like let go of everything in my life or anything in my life that I kind of previously thought defined me and just kind of surrender to this period of not knowing. And I found that the tarot and astrology, I tried a lot of different things. I mean, in addition to like the health stuff that I mentioned, I also went on this kind of emotional search, spiritual search. And tried a bunch of different modalities. Like I learned how to read the Akashic records and shamanic journeying, and did an apprenticeship with Mimi Young, who teaches shamanic journeying, and tried a bunch of different things. And it just felt like tarot and astrology were the tools that really clicked for me. And so tarot in particular was really helpful for just reflecting back to me where I was in that moment and helping me to get in touch with myself in a deeper way. Even though it felt like this kind of long and uncomfortable process, which, doesn't have a beginning and an end. It's like, I feel like what tarot has helped me to be more comfortable with is that feeling of not knowing ever
Mm.
what's happening, and just asking better questions, like being able to stay with the questions in a different way, and trusting my own intuition in a deeper way. So in those ways, like tarot helped me to kind of come home to myself in a new way, and to just be with the uncertainty of life that is, kind of always happening, always.
Being on your own fool's journey.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I didn't ever think when I found the tarot that I would end up loving it and wanting to write about it and read about it and study it. But and in fact I really like resisted it for a long time because I really was clinging to this idea that like I needed to be an artist in the way that I thought that I needed to be, and I needed to, and I was there was a lot of like trying to force. And so I came here sort of kicking and screaming, but I'm happy to be where I am now, I guess. But
I gotta ask you, do you remember what the deck was that you saw in the museum?
yeah, yeah, it was the Luigi Scapini Medieval Tarot. I don't know if it's a super common deck, but it seems like
I have it. I have it.
you
I,
do.
I I am a tarot connoisseur. I've breached over the 200 mark of tarot decks that I own.
Wow. Wow,
Yeah.
that's impressive.
I have a little
The
collection.
word we use isn't impressive. It sounds like impressive. It's more like obsessive,
No,
but
no, 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 no.
impressive works too.
Being an art person, I'm sure you can kind of relate to. I only use probably out of the 200 plus decks I have, I probably only use two or three.
Me too.
I
Yeah.
like the art of them, and it's almost like I like to collect the art of them.
Yeah. Each one is its own universe.
Exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
Do you have a favorite deck? I have to ask.
I love that deck. It has a special place in my heart for sure. And I love that it's inspired by kind of like the medieval decks. And those are probably, even though I don't use them in readings, I just love the art. Like the Visconti Sforza deck is one of my favorite decks of all time. In terms of contemporary decks, I really like the Pagan Otherworlds deck. And I just use the Rider Waite when I'm doing readings. It's just, it's kind of basic, but it's just what kind of speaks to me the most, I think. The most clearly in reading.
It's amazing how well Pixie's art comes through. Pamela Coleman Smith's
Yeah,
art just speaks
yeah.
to so many people so easily.
I know. Yeah. She really created a map for so many people to follow.
She did. And speaking of a map, when I first read the title of your book, Timeless Secrets of the Ancient Mirror, my first thought was like, I'm intrigued about this mirror idea. Where are we holding a mirror up to? And I really like how you bring the tarot internal. This is all about working with yourself. So a lot of people love to use tarot to read the future or read someone else's future. And I love that too. That's
Mhm.
wonderful. But I very much love it for internal reflection, for
Mhm.
journaling with it, for seeing my own patterns, for working on the things that I need to work with. And in the introduction, when you first start talking about the fool's journey, and you talk about how tarot mirrors your own inner wisdom. I love that. And this is a beautiful map to help you work through the cards. And we talk a lot about journaling cards and pulling cards and just looking at what draws you and attracts you and what do you feel about it and how does it make you think and really writing through that. And the term map was really great. I liked how
Mm.
you said that. That was a good way
Thank
to
you
put
for
it.
that. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I love the tarot for just self-reflection because I think it's such a insightful mirror. It really, is such a precise tool for that kind of work. And, I think that, because the inner and the outer, I think are connected in some way. I think the tarot can speak to both, right? Because there isn't such a hard division. So I think that it's a tricky thing because often I think people hear tarot and they think fortune telling, they think, scam artist or whatever. And it's not that it can't do that. I think that in a lot of ways, modern, tarot readers maybe try to stay away from that, myself included, because of all of the negative baggage that comes with
Mhm.
the idea of, trying to predict someone's future. And but I do think that the idea of fate or destiny is more mysterious than we can really
I
understand. And
agree.
that
Yeah.
when we're working with the tarot, we're tapping into something that doesn't, it's not like a linear, it's ancient and it's also futuristic. It's like it's not connected to a linear idea of time. And so in that way, it can speak to like our inner world, our outer world, our future, our past, our present. So yeah, I guess maybe I didn't get to explore that as much as I would have liked to in the book, just because it really had to be, we don't want to paint ourselves into a corner and say that we're trying to predict someone's future, but we also want to leave room for the fact that this is a mysterious force that we tap into, and it has, reflected future events with clarity for so many people. I think it's just finding a way to talk about it that doesn't freak people out or doesn't freak ourselves out because, yeah, I mean,
I mean, sometimes it freaks me out when I get
I
scary
know.
accurate or it really hits a nerve. I'm like, wow,
Mhm.
that's really, really good.
I
But yeah.
know. I know. And I was definitely spooked. Yeah. And especially in the beginning.
Speaking of spooky, we're
Hmm.
both a little spooked because there's so many synchronicities here.
Yeah.
Hmm.
We just recently did a meditation ritual. We presented it at a conference in Maryland, and it was the Fool's Journey. And we walked a Fibonacci spiral because we talked about how the Fool's Journey is not a straight line, it's a spiral. And you even say that in this book, in the introduction,
Oh,
almost word for word, some of the things the concepts that we explored in this ritual or
cool.
that we are all on this fool's journey that is a spiral. It's not a straight line. Life is not very often made up of straight lines.
Yeah.
And you can be at multiple different parts on this spiral at one time, and other people are on there with you, past, present, future, of yourself, of them, and we're kind of all in this beautiful spiral dance.
Mm.
And I love how you talked about that in here. You said this is not a linear ascent to greatness, but rather a spiraling path to wholeness.
You literally almost said those exact words during our
Wow.
meditation ritual.
And so I love that idea of the fool's path as this spiral of life.
But
Mm.
what's even, what takes it to the next step as far as synchronicities. So during our Fool's Journey ritual, I'm a big fan of takeaways, and I've convinced Layla, we always have to have a takeaway. People like to take things.
Uh-huh.
So Layla had crafted for all of the ritual participants, she crafted a bunch of different fool cards. And the idea was they took a fool card in the beginning, and then could exchange it at the end. So, she had created a couple of designs on her own, but a couple of designs she had chosen off the internet as part of cards that we gave away.
You took
Mhm.
cards that were in the public domain, some beautiful cards that I just resonated with.
Layla, can you tell her the fool cards that you chose and how that relates to her book?
Sure. Of course, we chose the Rider-Waite-Smith
Oh,
because
yeah.
Pixie, gotta love
Of
Pixie.
course.
The one card I didn't use was the Visconti Sforza, if I'm saying that correctly, Fool, although I thought that was beautiful. But
Mm.
I did use the LeFou card from Oswald Wirth's deck
Mm. Yeah.
and also from the Polsky deck.
Mm.
And
Nice.
on your page of the Fool, you had almost every single Fool card there we had used
That we
Oh,
had
in the
used.
ritual.
yeah. Yeah, that's so
So
cool.
it was just, I mean, I know that they're common and they're out there. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. So I just thought it
But
was
they're
kind
not
of
as
interesting.
common as other thing. Yeah. Yeah. And it
Yeah.
was just it was very cool to open up to the first page with the fool. And it was like,
Mhm.
oh, we
A
used
beautiful
those.
Yeah.
coincidence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are all our friends. Those are our
Yeah.
buddies.
Now, one thing, I have been very deep into tarot for decades. Like I said, I have more decks than any one person really should have, and no shame, I will buy more. Um, but one thing I never got deep into is the aspect of tarot as it relates to the Kabbalah tree of life.
Mhm.
And that was the very first thing I see when I open up the book. So
Mhm.
can you just talk a minute about how that relates to tarot?
Yeah, so to try and be succinct about it, because it's a vast subject, but to try and be succinct, I would say that the tarot emerged from the 15th century Italy, right? So we sort of know its origins, but we don't know. There isn't a lot of writing about what the purpose of the major arcana was or how the original artist, if there was one, envisioned it. But it does happen to map onto these other systems of thought, there's the 12 signs of the zodiac with the 10 planets. And so that creates a system of 22, which maps nicely onto the major arcana. And then the Kabbalah has also, there are 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So there's a resonance with that system in terms of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the major arcana.
Okay.
And it's just another lens through which you can look at the tarot and maybe find another layer of meaning.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think that any of these things were baked into the original major arcana or the
Right.
tarot, but they're just sort of layered into the book as an offer, as an offering of like, this is another layer you can add to it if you want to, if it brings meaning to you, or if that's a system that you're already familiar with, then maybe you can connect to that in a different way. But it was presented kind of as just like a list of almost like correspondences for that reason, so that if someone kind of wanted to go deeper or already knew about it, they could connect to it. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of information in the book about it. I guess for that reason, because it would be its own, it could
Its
be in
own book.
our books about it, right? So it's just kind of like a little wink to say, if this interests you, there are other books about this, or there are other ways to like learn about this more. But it's definitely a fascinating rabbit hole to explore and to wonder about and to find connections between. But I do think tarot kind of has its own unique essence that doesn't map perfectly onto any other system necessarily.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I understand you are also interested in apotropaic magic with symbology and protection symbols. And so I'm not surprised that finding interest in the tree of life and different symbols is interesting to you. But in the
Mhm.
book, I love that you have like right at the top, you have different symbols that are associated with each card. And when you talk about the major arcana cards, you pack in. So there's the symbols right at the top. You talk about the numbers, you talk about the different correspondences and different things. It's like a quick, dense guide of information where you might not necessarily go deep into each piece, but they're all there. They're all right there for your brain to catch on to. So, when I'm journaling and I pull the Emperor, having this book right here, after I get my first initial impressions and my ideas as I'm, meditating or working with that card, I can
Mhm.
pull this book out. This might give me a whole other rabbit hole to go down as I'm studying that card because you have so much information here that you pull out and make it easy to see.
That's why I love the very last page, which is a whole page of correspondences. I love correspondences.
Yeah, they're endless, endlessly fun too.
And they're fascinating how you can layer them on top of different things. And
Mhm.
to go back to Pamela Coleman Smith's art, just all the different things that she put in there, whether it was from whatever system that she took it from or whoever's information she got it from, she
Mhm.
layered it all in there. There were symbols and there's numbers and
Mhm.
things repeated. The Fool's Journey, you see different symbols repeated over and over again. And you bring a lot of that here and you bring attention to it. Although again, it's not a big book, it doesn't go necessarily in depth, but it's a
Right.
fantastic reference book when you want to have a guide that might give you more information.
I told Layla before we started recording that this is like the perfect book to like throw in your backpack.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. 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 It's full size.
You might not necessarily bring the big 78 degrees of wisdom, but this
Right.
will fit in your backpack.
Exactly, exactly.
Yes.
As people who love new spreads, I also very much enjoyed that you included a different spread to help you work with each card more. Can you talk to us about different spreads and are there any that you really like to use?
Yeah. I just sort of I came up with them based off of questions that I find myself asking not only for myself, but for when I do readings for other people as well. So I just tried to kind of think about what are the questions that tarot is very good at answering, the kinds of questions that tarot is good at answering, and what are, 22 ways to kind of pull those apart and make them into bigger spreads. And so I don't think there's anything that the tarot can't address, but I do think that there's ways of crafting questions that help you to get better answers and help you to get what really is the most helpful in terms of actionable guidance or an honest reflection. So I tried to just kind of keep that in mind as I was coming up with the spreads as what are questions that I ask all the time for myself, for other people, and how can they be sort of broadly applied to anyone who might come to this book and want to try a spread for themselves. So in terms of spreads that I like to use for myself, that's a good question. I really tend to craft my questions around whatever is bringing me to my deck to begin with. But I think generally the tarot is good for highlighting what is like a challenge, what am I not seeing? What is a blind spot? I feel like it's really helpful for that because that is speaking to, it's inherently you're asking what am I not seeing? What is outside of my conscious awareness? And so bringing that into a tarot reading I find to be always helpful. What is this project missing? What is missing from this dynamic between me and this other person? Or what is needed here that I can't see, I can't grasp? Or questions like, you know, where should I focus my attention in regards to this project? Or just kind of using the tarot to help me or others tap into what is hard to access consciously and using that information to give us a more well-rounded view of a reality because I feel like that's one way that tarot can be really practical.
Hmm. I love the blind spot question. I'm going to use that the next time I grab my deck. That's fantastic.
Yeah, you're not always in the mood to hear it, but when you are, you
It's
can act.
helpful.
Yeah,
Tarot's good at that, telling you things that you're not always in the mood to hear.
yeah, I know.
All right.
But
So, for our listeners who a lot of them love tarot, if they're going to pick up this book, what would you say they should flip to first? Where should they start?
hmm, it's not to be so obvious, but I would say start with the introduction. It's it's only a page,
Begin at
but
the beginning. There you go.
um, just because I feel like that is the one place in the book where you kind of get the zoomed out, bigger picture perspective of what is tarot? Why should we engage with it? What can it do for us? What is a way to approach this tool that can set you up to A, not be fearful of it if that's a concern, or two, to just kind of slightly help to orient you to the mindset of openness and receptivity and kind of surrendering control a little bit or surrendering your desire around what you want to hear or those kind of
Mm,
things. I think getting in kind of the right headspace is important whenever possible, if possible. It's not always possible, but so I think having that initial mindset kind of is helpful. And so I think the introduction might be good for that.
Always best to start at the beginning.
There you
I
go.
guess so,
I like
yeah.
that.
So I always ask this of tarot people because I am very conflicted and I do flip-flop.
Mhm.
So you talk on each page about the reversal meaning.
Mhm.
Now, I know that when you're writing books, you have to kind of be comprehensive, cover all the bases.
Yeah.
What are your real thoughts on reversals? When you do a reading for you or clients, do
Yeah.
you utilize the reversal meanings or do you just kind of read the cards?
Honestly, I don't read reversals, but I do feel conflicted about it also. So
Yes,
it's not an easy, yeah, it's a good question because it is something that I still wrestle with. For the first few years, I definitely read the reversals and yeah,
because all the books tell you you have to, right?
right, right. And then, you think, well, if it came out reversed, that is different than upright. Like, of course, there should be some different interpretation. So when I decided to stop reading reversals, I just don't let my cards come out reversed. Like I just shuffle them all upright. And then the way that I choose a card is just kind of hand over hand. And so they're not even allowed
Allowed
to
to be
enter the room.
I
See
love
that
that.
I do read reversals. I and for that reason, because I do feel that if it's reversed, there's a reason.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I can see where the confliction comes in. But it's interesting when I read professionally, I would always reset my cards between clients and I would take
Yeah.
them, I would cleanse them, and I would put them all upright.
Mhm.
I would then have the client shuffle the cards while they thought about their question. I can't think of one, okay, maybe one person in all the years I read cards did not reverse cards. Everybody somehow in their
It's how I
shuffling
shuffle. It's how I
would
shuffle.
reverse cards every
Yeah.
single time. And so in my mind, if they reversed it, that meant it had meaning. But
Mm.
if you're reading for yourself, I don't necessarily know. Like when I'm journaling, I don't necessarily, oh, I do. No, I do. I do write down that it's reversed. Okay, never mind. I do always read reversals.
And I don't think there's a right or wrong way at
Yeah.
all.
No.
But it's just each card does have a range of meanings that include the sort of reversed meaning.
Yes.
And
But
so
I
I,
kind of look at it as it depends
100%.
on what's around it.
Yeah.
yeah,
That's how I look at it, is it depends on what cards are either side to side or above or below, what is around it.
yeah,
And that's kind of where I get is it an upright or is it a reversal meaning, whether it's upright or reversed physically,
hmm
you kind of
hmm
have to see the whole picture and not just the one card.
Yeah. I
yeah.
agree with you, Natalie, that each card contains all of its meanings in it, no matter how it's positioned, I think is what you were
Mhm.
saying.
And if you do read reversals, that might be a way to clue you into how to interpret it.
Right.
It's just, I don't know. I think for me, they just became too, like, they gave me anxiety, and I just wanted to cut out that element from the reading. So I tried it, and then I just ended up kind of sticking with it, and it feels like it's working for me right now, but I may go back and read reversals at some point. I just, yeah, I just wanted to have I wanted to have a more streamlined approach, I think. And so that helped to streamline it. But
Yeah, I do flip-flop back and forth about that
yeah,
topic. I really do.
yeah. Well, do you shuffle them in a way that reversals could come out?
Yes. And
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's a lot of it is the way I shuffle. And if I did it Layla's way, I could see where, okay, if you get a reversal, that means something. But with the way I shuffle, 50% of the deck is bound to be
Uh,
reversed, period. You know
yeah,
what I'm saying?
right. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's right.
I
Totally.
shuffle in a chaotic way.
Yeah. You throw them on the floor and
I
mess them up all around. But yeah.
have done that. I
She is a
have
little
done that.
chaotic.
Yeah.
I do find that the more I know a deck, the better I communicate with a deck, the better relationship that we have, the
hmm
more they'll speak to me no matter what position they're in, no
Right,
matter
right.
how they come out of the deck. They have a story to tell. And if
hmm
I'm in tune with it, it doesn't matter how it comes out of the deck.
Yeah.
It just
Exactly. Yeah.
going to tell you what it's going to tell you. So the better I know a deck, the more like that I tend to read.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel that too.
But definitely this book, like we said, we're not joking. This is a great little handbook to have. Toss it in your backpack, keep it with your
Yeah.
tarot journal. This is really going to give you some insight. If you know about the Fool's Journey, or if this is your first time you've heard about the Fool's Journey, this is going to give you some amazing information. It's great for self-reflection. It's great for magical working. It's a wonderful tool to know the Fool's Journey. And this book will give you a lot of insight. So 5 brooms up.
Absolutely.
So much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much to Natalie Labriola, author of Tarot, Timeless Secrets of the Ancient Mirror, for joining Chelle and I on Back on the Broomstick. We had an amazing time talking about one of Chelle's and my favorite topics, tarot. And of course, thank you to all of our listeners for joining us on this conversation as well. Please like, subscribe, give us some reviews, a few stars. It really helps the show out and helps other listeners to find us. We will see you next week for another episode of Back on the Broomstick. Until then, be wise, be wicked, and as always, you magical people, keep it witchy.